are oftentimes those that are in situations that need improvement historically. So just to give one particular example, when we talk about the changes to the atmosphere, it's not just greenhouse gases, but this is affecting people's exposure to disease and ability to breathe. So Black Americans, just as one example, are nearly 1.5 times more likely to have asthma compared to white Americans. Puerto Rican Americans are nearly 2 times more likely to have asthma compared to white Americans. And when sex is factored in, Black women have the highest rates of death due to asthma compared to white Americans. So the systemic divestment from Black and brown indigenous communities causes huge disparities in health. And this is just one example that we can start to look at this evening. I wanted to give a brief overview before I hand off to Jacques, where he can give us more information about a variety of these issues that I'm only just now beginning to learn about. So Jacques, whenever you're ready, if you're prepared to present to us, we're ready to learn more.
Thank you, Ian. Let me go ahead and share my screen.
Sure.
All righty, good afternoon to you all. Good afternoon to you all. Thank you so much, Ian and Olivia and the Khalil Institute as a whole for inviting me here today. So today I'll chat a little bit about the overall intersection of climate change, social and racial justice. And afterwards, I'll highlight a little bit about the NAACP and the NAACP's Environmental and Climate Justice Program. As Ian already introduced me, my name is Jacques Werleigh. I am the Florida ECJ field organizer for the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program. So let's jump right into it here. All right, so real quick agenda. I'll quickly highlight some pieces related to social and racial injustice, expanding a little bit more on what Ian already shared with us this evening. Then quickly jump into some parts related to climate change and impacts. Then we'll jump into environmental and climate justice, and specifically, I'll highlight some pieces related to health, the economy, and our overall food and agricultural system. And then lastly, bring it back towards the NAACP and the Environmental and Climate Justice Program. So as it relates to social justice or injustice, again, Ian highlighted a few of those pieces, but to think about it plainly, it's the violation of right or of the right of another individual in our group, right? May that be on the basis of race, gender, age, sexual orientation, and they can occur in relation to, honestly, practically any aspect, right, of our society where inequality can arise as a result of unjust prejudices or policies that we know we already have. So here I just wanted to highlight a few overall movements, social justice movement, human rights movements. So we have here on the right, the Families Belong Together, which is in response to some of our immigration issues that we have. Of course, voting rights, which has systemically been a thing and it continues to be a thing. And of course, women's rights. So just a few examples of some overall social related movements. And as it relates to racial injustice, we know that within the United States, a great piece of the founding of this country is based on slavery and slave labor. And that has been sort of a bit of a backbone on some of the things that we've been built upon, right? And then after we'll say the end of slavery, right, we were continued to be plagued with policies during the Jim Crow era and policies as it relates to housing and lending with redlining. And even pieces with criminal justice system, right? And those are some pieces within our society that has been there very early within its founding and are still present today, even though they take a different type of form, right? So just wanted to provide just a little bit of those pieces of examples as it relates to social and racial justice and movements. And there's many more, of course, we know, especially in today's age in response to some of these injustices. And additionally, right, so now I'll do a little bit of jump into the role of climate change, right? So we talk about social and racial injustice, and though I did do a brief overview on that, it's to understand that these issues and a lot of these issues have been there within our society, within our systems for a very long time. So they've been able to infest and are present in so many of our policies and so many of our systems of control that we have. And climate change has, right, I think even more so recently, there's some conversations I've been having with folks to think about that. I was born in the 1990s. So, right, even 20, 30 years before I was born, scientists have been talking about the dangers of climate change. They've been throwing data and it's just to think that this piece now has bubbled up. And I think, better late than never for sure. Excuse me. But those pieces, they build on into an already stressed and unjust system, right? They add fuel to what we already know is not right and is unjust. And now climate change bring this piece, and we know here with the Clio Institute, and I have to give a shout out to the Clio Institute for their Clio Network speaker series that I attended last year to talk about climate change and learn about climate change and learn how to talk about climate change. To think that, through all these years, we've been burning fossil fuels, right? And that's been sort of the backbone of our industrial revolution that got us to the point that we are in today, right? So a lot of those greenhouse gases has contributed to our overall increase in temperature, and it continues to happen, right? So it's our overall global air and surface water temperatures. So with that, it comes a plethora of problems that we here in Florida are not, we're not foreign to, but the intensity and the damage associated with those impacts are getting more and more, or worsening more. So just real quick to highlight a few of these extreme weather pieces, a direct result of climate change, drought, heat waves, wildfires, flooding, sea level rise, increase in frequency and intensity, and all of those pieces. And just to highlight the past 3 years, and of course the current year that we're in as it relates to the hurricane season. The picture in the far right corner there, that is a picture of Hurricane Dorian back in 2019, which was maxed out at 183 miles per hour. Some folks call that a superstorm, just because, you know, again, breaking records on that. We had the season, last year's season, which for me was the first time that, you know, and at least in my adult life and consciousness, to see that we've hit Greek alphabets because we had about 30 named storms last year. And then of course, this hurricane season is not yet over, but we know that we are still dealing with the disasters from Ida, and those communities are going to continue for a few more weeks, even some months, to fully recover, and some may never recover. In addition to what we are facing here in the east out west, a continuity as it relates to mega drought, wildfires. So since August 14th of this year, the Caldo fire has burned more than 200 acres of forest. In addition, out west, there's, you know, record level drought, very low record level water, and several different lakes and reservoir. So, you know, this piece highlighting the overall impacts of climate change, you know, and thinking about now where environmental and climate justice plays a role, right? And overall is to understand that there's the overall burden of climate change is not going to be equal. One, they're not going to be equal to those that will be most impacted, contributed overall less to our changing climate now. I like to think not just, you know, to think about here in the United States. For me, mentioned, like, you know, as Ian mentioned earlier, working in Haiti, I'm Haitian. I always think about the international perspective. I always think about this piece of global North and global South. And to think about all those impacts of climate change, all those prediction of climate change, those countries in the global South will face them, but they won't have as strong of a infrastructure and or economy to be able to invest in levees, invest in seawalls and other mechanisms that make those folks more resilient. And overall, I think Ian touched base on this a little bit as we start. When we're talking about environmental justice, is to think about the fair and equal treatment of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, gender, sexual orientation, gender ability, or income level, and the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws. Now, with the climate piece, the NAACP recognizes that climate change is real, and it affects, its effect hit African American, low income, and other frontline communities first and worst. And to talk about a little bit of those impacts as it's, you know, compounded, I think that unfortunately, the COVID pandemic brought to light a lot of overall, not just injustices within our system, but just the overall fragility of our system and how so many things are interconnected, right? So we'll just highlight a piece associated with health, right? Because, you know, environmental and climate justice issues are multi-layered issues. So they require multi-layered approaches to solving them, right? So, you know, people of color and low-income communities are disproportionately affected by exposure to pollution from industries such as coal-fired power plants, landfills, and other industrial pieces that releases pollutants into our communities, into our environment, right? So these things are impacting our environmental health, which is also having an impact into our personal health, human health. So just a few minutes ago, I talked about some of our exposure, right? So just real quick, just had these facts up here. Think about that 71% of African Americans live in counties in violation of air pollution standards. We have approximately 68% of African Americans that live within 30 miles of a coal-fired power plant. And we know that overall, no one wants to live next door to an oil refinery, incinerator, highways, or any other site that is constantly and is recognized as a polluting site, right? Yet millions of people and billions of people around the world do. And this puts them at a much higher risk for different diseases, such as respiratory diseases, cardiovascular diseases, cancers, death, so on. And the impacts of climate change only, exaggerate the situation, right? We know that it's going to impact folks directly, of course, right, from heat waves and floods and storms, which we've seen and we are continuing to see just this year alone. And indirectly with some of the things that, you know, Ian highlighted earlier as it relates to smog and ozone and just bad and low air quality, right? And I thought this piece was really interesting, which was, I believe it was from the CDC, that have a whole section on climate and health, where it provide details and more details to the climate and air pollution, right? Climate and allergens and pollen, food insecurity, temperature extremes, flood, mental health and stress related diseases. I think food and waterborne diseases, and something even more interesting is the disease carried by vectors. So those are mosquitoes, ticks. So there's a whole lot that we could spend just talking about this slide here alone. And it's just to highlight, right, some of the problems that we do have, and we know that we have with climate change, and we're going to have with climate change, and we put that the backdrop of the already existing environmental racism, right, for some of these communities. So again, another report here just highlighting the link between premature death, asthma-related emergencies, and bronchitis, right? As well as that proximity to some of these polluting sites. And this next piece, I'll just sort of quickly brush on it just so I can stay here on time. But in this piece of environmental and climate justice, there also exists a economic boundaries, right? Because earlier I mentioned, in an international level, how some of these countries, don't necessarily have the economic power to invest in ways to mitigate and adapt. But here, within the United States, we know it's something that we have, right? That, in addition to having to being targeted, right? We can say of having some of these energy producing sites near the residential area. So one, there's a health cost. In addition, there's economic costs as well. And as a whole, when we talk about loss of property and livelihood during some of these major events that we've seen, it's a lot harder for African American families and low-income families and communities to bounce back. Sometime once they've moved out of that area, it's really hard to really come back to that neighborhood and home. So this piece just wanted to highlight the overall cost of climate change, right? There's a big financial piece to it, and this one here is highlighting events in 2020. I think there was about 22 separate billion-dollar events in 2020 that had a combined cost of roughly $100 billion in damages. And then now we have this, 2021 is not yet over, and we know we still have the fires out west, and we are still within the hurricane season. And of course, again, talking about the fact that we have communities still recovering and still feeling those effects of Hurricane Ida. Real quick, so just when we talk about the climate and environmental injustice here, this picture on the left is something to highlight that in addition to California going through these wildfires, we see a lot of folks that the ones that do have the opportunity to be evacuated. There is loss of property. But within that same background, there are thousands of farm workers that are still working, whether it's wildfire, whether it's extreme heat, whether it's rain, as it relates to the elements. We have our farm workers out there that are still laboring in the field, and they are one of our most unprotected frontline communities. And African American farmers, many of whom have already been struggling to maintain their overall livelihood, right? There's that dependency in agriculture as a whole to seasonality, and that part is changing, which is impacting the overall economy. And we know that a lot of crops have been lost, particularly throughout the Midwest and South, during flooding events, and those things are only set to increase more and more. This piece here is again, just thinking about how all of this is accumulating, and thinking that we're still amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Though here in the United States, we've been fortunate to have different vaccines available to us. And just like that that pandemic has impacted us economically, has impacted every other country economically as well. And we have some of the countries that are in Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, again, the global South, that have been getting hit year after year after year, maybe by intense hurricanes. Last year alone, there was 2 Category 4 hurricanes that hit Central America. So there's a whole lot of migration. That piece is driving a whole lot of migration from Central America, from South America. And recently, just as last week, we know that there was close to 15,000 Haitian migrants that did that dangerous trek and journey to come to our border, and the initial welcome, the overall welcome that they got wasn't much of a, right? It definitely was not much of a welcome. So to think about these issues, and to think about climate change, and to think about social, racial, and climate justice, as it relates to climate change, those pieces, some of those stressors, are only going to increase, and they're only going to put some more pressure into some of our already fragile and stressed systems, right? Thankfully, right, we have some aspects of solutions, right? To think about at this point, we are committed to the impacts of climate change, right? So there's a part about adaptation that we need to do, which addresses the overall effects, right, of climate change. It focuses more on reducing the overall vulnerability to harmful effects of climate change. For some coastal communities, it could be seawalls, stormwater improvements. For a lot of areas, there's the part about reestablishing a tree canopy, protecting our trees, planting more trees, and of course, mitigation, right, which addresses the overall cause, which hits at the greenhouse gas emissions that we have, and focusing on closing some of those coal-fired power plants and dirty sources of energy, and focusing more on clean and renewable energy are good examples of mitigation solutions. Now, which brings me to the NAACP and their environmental and climate justice program. The NAACP was founded back in 1909, and it is the largest and the oldest, or at least one of the oldest, civil rights organizations in our country. And a lot of those movements that I've talked about, they've been involved in those issues since their founding. So really, when they talk about being committed to dismantling racism and disrupting inequality to create a society where all people can truly be free, our work includes civic engagement, systematic building racial equity, and supporting policies and institutions that prioritize the urgent needs of Black people who are most impacted by race-based discrimination. And they've been doing that since 1909. From the engaging and engaging in lobbying with the American Medical Association, to voting right, human right, education, segregation. I mean, you name it. Since 1909, the NAACP have been involved in the fight, have been involved in the fight. For me, I've been working in this role for NAACP since earlier this year, and I'm just so amazed by the organization's overall infrastructure and that extensive potential that it has. So real quick, so for me, when I talked about the, working at the Environmental and Climate Justice Program, so we start with the national NAACP, and then we have state conferences. So for us here, it's the Florida State Conference, and we are blessed to have the amazing Dr. Adora Obianwezi as a president of our Florida State Conference. And she's been leading us here in Florida for a number of years. Then from the state level, we have multiple units throughout several counties within the states. And then we also have college chapters and youth chapters as well. So really from Pensacola, all the way down to Miami-Dade, the NAACP has members throughout the state that is engaging on some level on a number of those issues that we've already highlighted. The environmental and climate justice starting being more prevalent within the NAACP, I can say maybe for the past 10 years. Jackie Patterson, our former director, Jackie Patterson. We also have other organizers, coordinators, Mandy, Jane, and Denise, Danielle. We have an amazing team over at National that engages with our numerous environmental and climate justice committees. So the environmental and climate justice program was put into place to help empower our leaders throughout the state and throughout all of our different units. The mission statement of the Environmental and Climate Justice Program is the commitment to directly advancing the leadership of frontline communities to eliminate environmental and climate injustices and to ignite an environmental, social, and economic revolution. We have three main strategic objectives as it relates to, of course, the causes of climate change. One is to reduce harmful emissions, particularly greenhouse gases. Two is to advance energy efficiency and clean energy. And three is to strengthen community resilience and livability. And the Environmental and Climate Justice Program, they've worked throughout the years with several different stakeholders to create so many different toolkits, right? So we have the cold-blooded action toolkit that focuses directly on steps and resources related to how to go about shutting down, working with the community to shut down a coal power plant. We have Turning the Tide, which came out recently, which looks at advancing racial justice and federal flood infrastructure and projects. We've come out with some equitable solar policy principles. And then there's also the In the Eye of the Storm toolkit, which is another toolkit, but this one is focused wholeheartedly on disaster preparedness. It has several different modules, several, hundreds of pages, and collectively, outside of having these toolkits, the team at national and in the state and even at the municipal level, we have our leaders, our presidents, our ECJ chairs that are using these toolkits, that are hosting events and are working on those overall three strategic objectives that we have. So as I wrap up, just wanted to highlight here within Florida, and again within all of the United States, there is NAACP chapter where you are. So join your local chapter, donate for your local chapter, national chapter, state chapter, support, and become a member. So you can go to naacp.org and you'll see the become like membership, and you can just click that and you put your name, zip code, and it'll let you know your nearest unit that you can get involved in. And these units, throughout the nation, I think we have more than 2,000 units throughout the nation, and more. We have a lot in Florida as well, so we'll say that. I don't even try to count, but collectively, we have folks that are engaging in CERT, right? So trying to increase the number of our members that are CERT certified, right? That can assist with disaster response and preparedness and education. The units are advocating on several different issues, exposing injustice, always whenever it surfaces. Working with different stakeholders to start different solar type of initiatives to work on food security, to educate on reducing and reusing, right? Waste management. So there are so many different things that our units are doing, and they are, holding town hall meetings where they are engaging the public and our elected officials in this conversation. So I'm really impressed, and I feel really fortunate that I've been able to continue to work for the NAACP Environmental and Climate Justice Program. And I highly recommend you all to join in and become a member and or support what our local leaders, NAACP leaders are doing. Ian, that's pretty much, I think that's it for me on that part. I'm not sure on the questions how we want to do that, but thank you.
Sure. Thank you for your presentation. That was, I learned a lot from that. And I'm going to check our question and answer section here. Okay, so I'm looking at this one we can start with. This person asked, considering all of the opportunities to impact at the intersection climate and health, to which initiatives does NAACP ECJ apply the most focus? So where's a lot of that focus being directed?
So I'll say that we have a big piece that's oriented towards energy. So one, it's to work on shutting down, at this point now we can say transition away from coal and dirty types of energies and moving towards this clean energy, green economy. So those two pieces and the policies related around that, the awareness and education as it relates to those pieces.
All right, excellent. So let me see if I can find another question that would be good. So I have a question here that says, you mentioned youth chapters, But what about public education? Why is stuff like this not taught in schools? Is anything happening there?
Excuse me. And I mean, the public education piece can, I mean,
That's a whole nother discussion. Yeah.
yes, right. That's a whole other discussion. So I think at this point now, I think there's some places that are just, they're overreacting towards this whole critical race theory piece, and I feel like we're going backwards in some areas. So, but on another piece, on that question, I can say that, what I found within the NAACP and within doing community work is that it can happen, right? I think I know that within the NAACP, we've had several of our ECJ leaders that are heavily focused on education. And even though it may not be part of the curriculum, right? By starting different after-school programs or different types of initiatives where you can provide some education as it relates to the environment and climate, and help build that overall resiliency. So I know that we have a couple of our ECJ leaders throughout the state that have started and are interested in starting pieces more specific towards education in our youth.
All right, excellent. So we're getting a few more questions that are coming in. I see one that's here. As a reminder, if you have a question, please put it in the question and answer, the Q&A section, as opposed to the chats. One of the ones that I do see in the Q&A section: how can the NAACP help advocate for solar panel application in the low-income neighborhoods of Hallandale Beach, Florida? Example, streamline permit applications, co-ops, etc. So a solar panel question, it sounds like.
So I'll say that, for me, I'm working at different levels. So you mentioned Hallandale, and the first thing I'm trying to think of is what county is that in? Maybe that might be Broward County. Is that?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's Broward County.
Okay, yeah.
Okay,
So there's a lot of stuff that we do. It happens at the local level, right? Mm-hmm. So, and then for me, one of the biggest things that I've seen is it's if you want to engage the NAACP, you can engage the NAACP, right? So I think, when we bring up stuff like you just mentioned about the solar panels, or if it's some type of resolution that we might be working towards, if we have common ground as it relates to environmental and climate justice, there's reasons to collaborate. So I would say to you is to engage your local NAACP Broward County unit in that conversation, and engage their ECJ committee, right? And then from there, we can start bubbling some of those issues up through the NAACP lens.
All right, excellent. I see that we have another question. It appears to come from the Clio Institute's own Caroline Lewis. Do you work with the WEJAC, White House Environmental Justice Advice Council? I'm assuming that's Advice Council.
So I'll say no, not myself personally, but on the national level, we have several of our members and our stakeholders that are part of different advisory committees that, so I know that we sit and we participate in a lot of different, in all of those different bodies, but I'm not 100% sure on the one that you just mentioned.
That's fine. That's an honest answer. We got a question asking, Are you working on NAACP student chapters at universities in Florida, and how active are they?
The NAACP has a very interesting infrastructure. So we do have units in different colleges. I know that there's one, I think, at USF, at UCF, FAMU. I know that we have units throughout those colleges, and my engagement with them has been a little bit indirectly. So I'm not engaging them indirectly, but if an individual did want to engage our college and youth chapters and units, we have a vice president that is in charge of that that whole sector. So I'll be happy to plug you all together if you wanted to do some type of engagement with them, and I can facilitate on that part.
All right, excellent. Sounds good. And speaking of collaborations, this next question, how can traditional green or environmental groups support the local and state NAACP leaders?
So I love that question. I have my email here, and I also have the our chairman, Louis Jennings, here. And Louis Jennings, he's the chair of the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee at the state level. So for any groups that are interested in supporting, I think join in, become a member, attend an event, and for some of those environmental groups, participate within the Environmental and Climate Justice Committee, and let your voice be heard. And of course, I think it's something to say that as long as the strategic objective in that mission statement, right, continues to be like at the core, those other environmental organizations are more than welcome to participate and attend their local unit meeting, and attend their events that way. And again, so my email is here. It's jwerleigh@naacpnet.org, or you can email Chairman Jennings, and we'll be happy to get you in touch with your local president and or ECJ chair.
All right. Well, we have some time for a few more questions. This question's asking, knowing about climate change and accepting it's real and we must work on adaptation and mitigation is one thing. Being able to act on this knowledge is something else altogether, especially if you don't have resources. What is the NAACP doing in that regard? So kind of how do we act on this sort of questions, especially if it's difficult to do so?
So I'll say,
that's a tricky question, I'll admit.
that is, it's a really good question though, because what I found, I don't want to even say recently, but like we are fortunate to be in a democratic country, maybe a capitalistic democracy. We can go into the fine pieces of that. It requires participation. That's the biggest thing that it requires. So I think, and this is the biggest thing that I see the NAACP has, is that one, it has the size, it has the clout, it has members at so many different levels. And when we bring in this, this environmental and climate justice program, it's to add another card within this organization that, historically have been fighting for things since 1909, right? So for like a number of key issues, they've been pivotal in fighting. And now, again, for the past 10 years or so, taking on this mantle of environmental and climate justice. So it's the piece that the program is doing to educate and empower our leaders to be able to advocate properly, right? To be able to expose, to recognize environmental and climate injustice, and then expose it. And then on the national level, state level and everything like that, you get, we're able to provide additional support as it relates to, logistics, and we have folks that can help find grants, so it's a nice network that we have that is now focusing specifically on environmental and climate justice, and helping empower our leaders at the local level to be able to, advocate for the proper funds, advocate for the proper policies and initiatives.
Right, so I'm looking at our time that we have right now. It looks like we have time for maybe one last question. I see one here. Does NAACP lobby or try to influence FPL, Florida Power and Lights, which must cooperate with solar initiatives by adding sufficient megawatts for solar fields, developments to provide electric to disadvantaged neighborhoods? So NAACP's connection with FP&L.
So we don't have a connection with FPL, so I'll just say that. Energy in Florida, which I know some of you all on the chat may know, it's heavily dominated by utility scale providers, right? And I think they've done quite a lot to maintain the status quo, to keep the money where, in their pockets or where they want the money to be. But I can say, at the local level, we have we have several different ECJ leaders that take on different fights. We have some of our units in Miami-Dade, as well as our South Dade branch, that for this past year, they've been working with Solar United Neighbors. They've been working with other stakeholders to move initiatives related to clean energy. Just this past weekend, moderated a conversation over in Alachua County that was focused on 100% transitioning to 100% clean energy, and clean energy was definitely defined to be solar, wind, and geothermal, right? So I think even within that conversation, something that was key that we decided, to strike out is just like using the term renewable energy and trying to slip in like biomass, like burning within that, that's not okay. So the NAACP national, right, we've put out some guidance specific to, as it relates to clean energy, and we constantly hold different workshops and different convenings where we bring different panels and different speakers to educate our leaders on some of these issues, right? And different, carbon pricing schemes and things like that now, right? So at the local level, we do the engagement where we continue to advocate for clean energy, any policies that really facilitate or support democratizing the grid is sort of, what we are about as it relates to energy.
All right, thank you. There's a lot to get involved with. So I want to respect everyone's time as we come up on 6:30. Thank you, Jacques, for that presentation. I'm going to share screen so that I can close out with some slides of my own for the Clio Institute.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Thank you for the questions. My email address is there. Please follow up with any questions, comments, advice, set up one-on-one meetings, whatever it may be. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you again, Ian, and thank you again to the Clio Institute.
Of course. And this will be recorded, so that will be provided in follow-up communications next week. But we just wanted to thank you for coming this evening to the Clio Institute's webinar. You can continue to participate in action on the climate crisis. You can watch Clio climate presentations like this one. We also encourage you to join our Clio Speakers Network, which is actually going on right now. This cohort is finishing up, but a new cohort should be starting sometime after the new year. So if you visit our website, you should be able to find information when that may begin. For our youth members that are out there, we also encourage you to join our Gen Clio movements, which is primarily geared towards high schoolers and thereabouts. So if you are a member of the youth, or if you know someone that is in school that wants to have a positive impact on the environment, we encourage you to join the Gen Clio movement. We also hope that you'll join us next time. We're still finalizing some information on our upcoming October webinar. That will be on October the 28th. You can follow our events page, however, by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen. It should take you to our events calendar where you can see all the different things that we have coming up on the horizon. So thank you once again for joining us, and I hope you have a great evening. Jacques, thanks again for your presentation. Any closing thoughts before we finish for the evening?
No, again, please join your local NAACP unit. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.